Hello, my friend, and welcome to the 561st episode of the Sales Podcast. I'm Wes Schaefer, the Sales Whisperer, your host. Today we have Glenn Poulos. He's the author of Never Sit in the Lobby, 57 Winning Sales Factors to Grow a Business and Build a Career Selling. When I heard the title, and we get into this in the interview, I was thinking the approach was more of don't let them shunt you down to the lobby. Don't let them keep you on ice, keep you waiting. I had Jeffrey Gittimer on, and I had Anthony Parinello. Anthony Parinello talks about, he wrote Selling to Vito, the very important top officer. And he would always talk about if you're standing on linoleum, you're probably not talking to the decision maker. And he would talk about shunting you down, being pushed down to lower levels. Gittimer's always talking about, kick your own ass and make sure you're talking to the right people. Because the lower people can say no, they can't say yes. So that's what I thought he was getting into. But he does agree with that. But the meaning behind the title is interesting. And I agree with it. So we have a good talk. I don't want to steal the thunder, so get ready to take some notes. Some good stuff. We'll do a summary on the back end. As always, the Make Every Sale program is available for you now. It is on demand, and no coupon is needed, no promo code. I've lowered the price. It's affordable for everyone. So avail yourself of that. Just had a talk with an individual. I'm going to start doing some promotion. Some paid ads, some LinkedIn, some outreach, start growing the business. So you're going to be seeing more of the Sales Whisperer. But as we grow things, probably going to raise prices. All right. I practice what I preach, and I've got a wedding this weekend. So my first wedding of my 7 kids, my second son. So it's about to get crazy, and I need money to pay for these weddings. I got a fourth one I'm paying for braces. Kids need glasses, wedding. I got a second wedding in September. So you don't have to buy anything, okay? Just send money. Just open don't even do a GoFundMe. Just look me up online and mail me a check, okay? Come on. It's the least you can do for 561 episodes of free content. Show me some love, would you? But get you some of that, makeeverysale.com, and then come back and listen to this episode with Glenn. Glenn Poulos, author of Never Sit in the Lobby. Is that kind of like Nobody Puts Baby in a Corner?
Something like that.
Ontario, welcome to the Sales Podcast. How the heck are you?
I'm really good, Wes. Thanks for having me.
Nobody Puts Baby in the Corner, huh? Yeah. So I love the title. I love what you're getting at here. Do you know Anthony Parinello?
No, I can't say I do. No.
So he's a sales trainer and all. He wrote the Selling to Vito series.
Okay.
I don't know if you remember those. The very important,
that rings a bell. Yeah.
Very important top officer. So I got to meet him years ago. I've had him on the show, and a great guy. But I remember he always would talk about the Seymours, right? Like he calls it getting shunted to the Seymours. And he says, if you're standing on linoleum, you're probably not making the sale to the right person. So kind of like getting
that's awesome.
Like getting holed up in the lobby. Huh? Oh yeah, just go ahead and take a seat. He'll be with you in a moment. Like, oh my gosh. That's probably not a good sign, huh?
Yeah. I haven't seen linoleum in a while, actually, but yeah.
That's because nobody puts you in the corner and nobody puts you on linoleum. So that's why you're on the show. Yeah,
that's right. Hardwood and I'm not sure whatever, and Berber carpet only, And,
yeah, you walk in, it's like, oh, these floors aren't marble. Yeah. I'm canceling the meeting. Oh, very nice. So what brought this about? I mean, is that kind of the concept that don't be kept waiting?
Kind of. And I can definitely tell you what brought it about, but also there's also some people that they misread the title in a way where it's kind of a joke to me now, where they're like, never sit in the lobby. And they're like, well, like, should I be waiting in my car? And I'm like, no, dude, like you should be in the lobby, but you should be standing up. right? And don't sit down, don't play on your phone, don't be flipping through magazines, don't be calling the wife or the girlfriend, or whatever. Pay attention, stand up, don't show up too early because you don't want to be standing there for 20 minutes, on the backs of your feet. And but when the guy walks out, you want to be standing ready, waiting, and to shake his hand and say hello, right? And so some people are like, well, why? Why'd you make up that rule? And well, first of all, I'm not that tall, right? I'm like 5'6", right? So a lot of guys already have a height advantage on me. So some 6'4", CEO dude comes walking out, and he's already, I don't want 3 feet, looking down 3 feet on top of me, right? So I at least have to narrow the gap and be standing up at a bare minimum, right? And I just find that it's easier to not be distracted, not be tempted to take out my phone, and so pay attention, right? So. And I learned it back when I started. The way the book came about was, I started selling, 30 years ago, and actually longer than that now, but like 1985, and started making sales calls, and I started learning and seeing sort of, things that myself and my coworkers, my bosses were doing. Some things were good, and some things were bad, right? And so I started writing them down in a little leather notebook that I had, and I started naming them after people and adding the word factor, right? So, like the Albert Martin factor. And a lot of cases, these were things you did not want to repeat, right? These were a lot of the ones that got a name associated with them were sort of the negative rules, like don't do this, right? And then I started repeating the rules, and then people would start laughing, and they, oh my God, that's hilarious. And I would string them all together. And then, people start saying, oh, you should write a book. And so, I gave that as, the thought that I did, and of course promptly did not do anything. And then when March 2020 rolled around and I couldn't go on the weekends, and they canceled pickleball and, my other pastimes, the club closed and all that, I decided, hey, no time like the present. And so, I did some Googling to figure out what was required to write a book, and I got down to it. And as I like to say, I had learned that this guy had said, hey, if you want to write a book, just write 500 words every morning. And I said, well, there's no way. I mean, I have a busy routine I do every morning, but on the weekends I can write 2,000 words. So I'll trade one for the other, and I'll commit to doing it every single weekend. I'll write at least 2,000 words. So I started in around the beginning of the pandemic, and about 75,000 words later, I had a book, and I sent it for its first edit. It came back 4,000 words lighter because the editor says, Glenn, you can't say the F word that many times in a book. You get like 3 F's and a couple of damn it's, and that's about it, right? And I'm like, okay, fine, we'll go with 71,000 words. And I had myself a book, right? And then there was a series of different edits and things like that, and then I published it in February of 2022. So it's been out for a few months now. So that's kind of how I got here.
Are you a transplanted New Yorker? Man, I didn't think Canadians use the F word unless it was like friendly. Like, come to my friendly fish fry. Right. Isn't that what Canadians? That's the F word.
Yeah. Actually, you'll find that. We're right beside. We're connected to New York, right along a pretty long Ontario-New York border, and when I grew up, actually, I grew up in Niagara Falls, and we used to trade sides. Different, the Niagara Falls, New York, used to come across for some things in Canada, and Niagara Falls, Canada, used to go across for, so we have a lot of similarities, actually, and you'll find that Canadians often use that word in all of its, as verbs, adjectives, adverbs, prepositions. I don't know if you've ever seen that joke of all the, the 90 ways of using the word, but there's lots of colorful language up here, I can tell you. But we are very friendly. Of course, right?
That's good. So what are some other, because you got the subtitle is 57 winning sales factors to grow a business and build a career selling. So let's talk about the title, though. I mean, how how did that come up? I mean, you told me a little bit,
Sure.
but is it
Yeah.
basically just start off right, stack the odds in your favor? Like how long did it take you to come up with that exact title?
So, what I did was, first of all, I had no idea how to write a book, but I did write it all. But I hired a book publishing coach, and they basically guide you through it. They provide access to editors and designers of like covers and cover designers. Like, I mean, I don't have any artistic capability whatsoever. And they basically ask you questions, what do you want the cover, what this and that. They show you and give you the recipe on how to bake the perfect cake in the form of a book, right? But you're baking the cake, and so they helped me to come up with the title. They took my title and promptly threw it away and said it's no good. And the reason why they said was because the words didn't rank inside of Google and Amazon, and you wouldn't sell any books because nobody would find it, right? And I mean, it was something about having the factors, right? Because all the factors in the book, right? And they said, yeah, I mean, I said, understand it's catchy to you, but it won't work. You need to. And so they helped me to come up with the concept, and they basically spun a bunch of different titles for me to consider and change things around, and we glued it together and came up with the title. And essentially, they just went in and they picked one of the golden rules out of the book and came up with the title, which I thought was ingenious. And then I said, look, I really want, I really like something about the factors in there. And so they came up with the whole idea of, the 57 ways, and they got the word factor in there for me, right? 57 winning sales factors. And that's really how we developed the title. And yeah, and I mean the first part of the book, and I'm happy to go over a few of them, is sort of just a series of bunch of rules when you show up at the customer.
Right.
And and the first one, of course, it's actually the second rule is never sit in the lobby. The first rule when I hit the company, which I still do today, and it's called the call book factor. And actually, a few people that have read the book or was reading about the book or whatever, it's like, call books, I mean, those haven't been around since the 80s. And I'm like, yeah, I'm aware, I have a cell phone, and I run a company that builds the cell phone network for Bell Mobility and Rogers Wireless and TELUS in Canada. So I'm well aware of that call books have been replaced with cell phones and iPads and what have you. But I mean, the whole idea came with back in the 80s, where I'd learned this technique where when I was at customers, I would be introduced and I would write their name in my call book, which is a little kind of like a multi-ring binder, and you could clip in and out these little pages, in the A, B, C, D, E and you could write down the customers' names and their direct line or whatever at the time. And it was super handy, and it was very, very fast, right? And when I would meet them, I would employ a rule that my mother taught me, which was I would, for instance, if I was meeting you, I would say, hi, Wes. And then in my mind, I would go, Wes, 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 right? And then I would attempt to try to use your name 2 or 3 times in the next 10 or 15 minutes of meeting you, so that your name would impart. And then I would, of course, write your name down. So the next time I came back to your account, I'd be in the parking lot waiting for the appropriate moment to come in and not sit in the lobby. And I would go to the call book, which now is my phone or my laptop, and I would flip it open to your account, and I'd see how many people were there, 5 or 6 guys, maybe the buyer, Sally, Jack in engineering, Bob, whatever. And I would mentally place the face with the name before I went into the lobby. And this turned out to be one of my most valuable techniques that I've ever done, because one of my other rules is always ask them for a mini tour whenever you're there, right? And people are like, why a mini tour? What the hell's a mini tour, right? And I'm like, well, a mini tour is a tour that's not annoying to be asked for. A tour is a pain in the ass. Nobody wants to give you a tour that'll take forever. They imagine driving you around in a bus and having to, narrate, you for the next hour and a half. Whereas a mini tour is basically just a quick look at their lab, a quick look at the, whatever the environment you're selling in, right? And I mean, I was selling to companies, electronics companies and, companies like Honeywell and Rockwell and people building electronic modules and stuff like that, right? And so I'd ask them for the mini tour, and they'd walk me through the building, and guess who I'd bump into on the way to my mini tour is Bob, Jack, Sally, and everyone that was written down in my thing. And I had promptly, forgotten the association between the face and the name in the interim since I'd been away. And I would say, hey, Sally, how's it going? Hey, Jack. Hey, Bob. And they're like, who the hell's that guy again? They hadn't seen me in 6 months, maybe a year or whatever. But I'm basically bringing the memory of who they are to the forefront of my memory so I can say hello right away. Because there's really nothing worse when someone walks by, especially if they remember you, and they say, oh, hey, Glenn. And you're like, oh, hey, I can't remember your name. Right? We've all, that's especially common, like at the ballpark with your kid or whatever, when you're at ball games, or some of the parents remember you and you really can't remember anybody. And it's always awkward, right? And then your wife walks up with you and you're like, oh, hi, let me introduce you to who I can't remember what their name is, even though they know who I am. And so this little rule of the call book factor has always helped me to, at least the people that I knew, I could remember their names on the spot and I could rhyme them off, right?
Right.
And of course, I've one of the other rules is always asking for the mini tour, right? And so the other thing that I always talk to my people about is, and I mean, I've probably said it 3 times at least in the last 24 hours, is always show up with something in your hand and something in your mind. And so, yeah, we actually have a new lady that started as a sales rep with us this week, and she's going to visit new customers. And so I keep reminding her, like, whenever you're visiting these customers, always show up with something in your hand and something in your mind. And I go on a lot in the book about when you're making morning calls. In Canada, we have Tim Hortons Donuts. It's our equivalent to Dunkin' Donuts, but it's famous. It's famous Canada-wide, right? It's a former hockey player, and everybody loves Tim Hortons Donuts, right? So the idea is show up with something in your hand. It could be a brochure, it could be the quote they asked for, or it could be donuts, right? And maybe you're trying to break from the lobby into getting yourself a mini tour. A box of donuts might be just what you need to move them from standing there chatting with you for 30 seconds to maybe spending a few minutes taking you through the building, right?
Yeah.
And something in your mind is like, why are you there? What are you there to talk to them about? Like, don't hum and haw and not have a point of view. If you're going to show up and you're going to talk to a customer, have a specific set of, questions, to try to get to the bottom of what their problem are, or what they're trying to solve, that kind of a thing, right?
Yeah.
And I'm surprised at how many people show up with nothing. They don't have anything with them. They don't have any literature. They don't have anything to talk about. They have nothing in their mind. It's a blank slate, and they're expecting the call to go well, right? And it doesn't. Yeah. So,
what are your thoughts on literature? Once I learned how much I was hurting myself by passing it out too early, I kind of just stopped using literature at all.
Right.
Is there a right and a wrong way to use it?
Well, I totally agree with you, actually, and I'm also not a tree killer, right? I mean, so nowadays, of course, a lot of our suppliers, they don't even supply us with literature. I mean, if we need it, we need to print it, and or in some cases, they may have some version of their materials available, not in a downloadable fashion, but they'll actually send you literature. I never use literature in the way like what you're saying is where it's like, let me send you some literature, right? I'm only using it maybe as a augmentation to another end where I have nothing else sort of to start a conversation. So I'll bring literature with me to try to instigate a conversation, right? Because I always want to show up with something in my hand and something in my mind. So if I'm not at the point where I'm maybe bringing them a quote, which I'll go into in a minute, I want to bring them something, maybe it's our line card, all the vendors, all the manufacturers we sell, maybe a short form catalog of someone I know that they're going to be interested in, if I'm looking for some talking points, but yeah, I mean, I find that I think what you might be saying is like a lot of guys on the phone are like, oh, they're trying to get rid of you or whatever, and you feel like you want to close them on something. You're like, oh, well, then just let me send you some literature, right? I mean,
Right.
you don't need to send literature to someone unless he plans on buying something, right? And the literature that I'm bringing into the lobby is my literature from my briefcase, and it's going back in my briefcase when I'm done, right? I'm not leaving it with them.
Right.
And same thing with quotes. We don't give quotes to people unless they're unless they're asking it because they're ready to make a purchasing decision. Quotes are not, a lot of guys are, well, I sent them a quote. So
this is a hot prospect.
Yeah, right.
I got them at 90% of my pipeline.
Yeah. And but one of the stories in the beginning of the book that I go over is like, a lot of times people will say, can you send me a quote? And sometimes you really haven't done enough selling to realize, look, are they ready to make a purchase and they need to send a quote to purchasing so that the purchasing can, to issue a requisition so purchasing can buy it from you, or are they just trying to get rid of you in some way or something like that, right? But when people ask me for a quote, then I always say, okay, great. And I know where they're at. I'm talking to my customers. Geographically, they're in my area. That's we're territory salespeople here, right? And I'll say, okay, I'm going to be in your area on Thursday morning. Can I drop it off around 10 o'clock? He's like, oh, I'm really busy. I don't have time to meet with you or whatever. It's like, okay, it's fine. I'm going to be there anyways. I'll just drop it in the lobby. Is that okay? It's like, okay, if you want to drop it in the lobby, drop it in the lobby, right? A lot of people will break the primary rule that comes out in the book, which is never fax the facts or ship the shit, right? And so, of course, fax machines are ancient, but I couldn't come up with a pun or whatever, or I couldn't come up with a fancy saying using the word email or whatever. So I used the old one that I had, which was never fax the facts or ship the shit. So if someone asked me for a quote, which we used to fax back in the 80s, I would drive it over and I would drop it off, right? And the thing is like he says, oh no, I don't have time to meet you, leave it in the lobby or whatever. I'm like, okay, fine. So I'll show up at the lobby, and back then and even now you show up and the lady says, is he expecting you? And I'm like, well, yeah, he asked me for a quote. And so, and so then she'll call him up and she'll say, oh, Glenn's here and he's got this a quote for you. And he can't remember what he said a couple of days ago or whatever it was, and about sending me off or just drop it off or whatever. And 90% of the time, he sees that you've come. He's going to at least walk downstairs where you're standing in the lobby, not sitting in the lobby, right? Waiting. You have something in your hand, his quote, something in your mind. You want to find out where you sit or whatever. And as he's walking up, I've actually got the folder open, and my thumb's on the price, right? And I'm saying, I'm here. You were looking for this instrument, what have you. Here you go. This is the kind of investment we're talking about. Just while we're standing here, could I get your first impression? What do you think of the price? What have you? And from the look on his face, I usually know exactly where I stand in the pecking order, if I haven't known that already, right? There's lots. If I'd been there 2 or 3 times showing them the hardware or whatever, I already know where I am in the cycle. But in this case, where he just says, send me a quote, a lot of guys send it off black hole. I quoted them 90%, like you said, in the funnel. And then, of course, nothing happens. And he's moving it forward in the funnel for 6 months. And finally, his boss, tells him to kill it, right? But every time a customer asks me for something, I drop it off. I never fax the facts. I never ship the shit. So if they want to look at our instruments, we sell high-end instrumentation for engineers, right? And so a lot of time, oh, I need a demo. Can you send me a demo? Sure, I can send you a demo, but I'll go there, I'll hand deliver the demo, I'll insist on setting it up, I'll insist on seeing the environment, plugging in and making sure they know how to work it. Because a lot of times, if you ship it, it sits in their lab with in a cardboard box sealed up until the last possible minute when you call them and say, hey, I need my unit back. And, they haven't even properly looked at it. They didn't properly evaluate it. I'll actually, if they want a demo, then I'll schedule a time to go and see them. And while I'm there, I'll schedule the next time I'm coming back to see how they're doing. And then I know I've already got 2 visits with them. And while I've got those 2 visits, I'm looking through my call book and I'm figuring out all the other guys I can call both of those times while I'm in the building. Right. And yeah, and that's the way I use it to automatically fill up my days so that I'm not, I'm not trying to figure out what to do next Thursday. I'm already filling up next Thursday with all the activities that are occurring, this week or the week before in that area, right?
What if your prospect isn't in town?
So I talk at length about the Winnipeg Factor in the book. And Winnipeg is, which we call Winter Peg in Canada. It is one of those cities that's famous for its, unpleasant winters. We'll just call it that, right? It's a town where you have to plug in with a block heater, or your car won't start the next day. It's that kind of cold, and it also gets cold very early. Like their summers end way before Toronto summers end, and they start early and they end late, right? And so I used to cover Winnipeg, and I learned very early on a key thing about all my competitors that covered Winnipeg versus myself, and that's that I went to Winnipeg every 6 to 8 weeks, like clockwork. They only went when and if, and hardly if, they thought they had a proper opportunity to justify the trip. And Winnipeg is a government town. It's the capital of that province. There's a lot going on there. And I knew that every 6 to 8 weeks I was there. And so I'm like, hey, I'm coming to town. They're like, wait a minute, you're like flying in on a plane and renting a car and driving over here? Like most people just fax the fax or ship the shit. And I'm like, no, I'm actually hand delivering it. And I have something in my hand and something in my mind. And they're like, well, then sure, come on over. And so something happens in, the first visit. And instead of then saying I'm going to fax it later or ship it later, I bring it back 6 weeks later. And I know now I have my first call lined up for my next trip 6 weeks from now, or if it's the next one. And so, those visits are displaced by 6 or 8 weeks. But when you're selling $100,000 instruments, and a lot of times it's fine, and and it works. Obviously, if I have to email the guy something in the short term, I would do that. I'm not going to fly to Winnipeg to drop off something, that can't wait for the 6 weeks. Right. But that's how I handle the far ones. And what ended up happening was that we became a pleasure to do business with. We came to town, we brought equipment, we did lunch and learns, and a lot of the competitors did not. And so by virtue of the fact that we were servicing the account, we would get first right of refusal on quoting things, right? They would come to us first. Guys would sort of, they would try to go get a second or third quote or whatever, and they would say, oh, we're the best, we're bigger, faster, wider, deeper, 20% cheaper, that kind of a thing. And they're like, yeah, but you never come to see us. And a lot of times that would default, and because they were buying more than just the product. Obviously we need a proper instrument, proper product at the time, but all things being equal, we would win out based on that service. And then a lot of people would find out, hey, Glenn's doing all this business in Winnipeg. They'd hear about, so-and-so installed this and that and the other thing. And they think, you got to go to Winnipeg. And so they would send their guy on a mission to Winnipeg. And he would, of course, fly in, and it'd be minus 20, and, the car wouldn't start. He'd forget to plug it in, and all that jazz, and have to get a replacement rental car. And he'd like, this sounds bullshit. There's nothing here. And they would go back with their tail between their legs. And 6 weeks later, I would be back in town, and I'd be selling all those customers our products. And so, that your question was, how do I handle them when they're not local? I've scheduled repetitive trips, and I use each trip before it to ensure that the trip is busy and full before I even get there, right? And and there's always time, and that's where I use, that's where I'm going to be cold calling and figuring out other ways and means to fill up the day, and prospecting new accounts and things like that. But again, in my business and market or whatever, a lot of times, especially in those remoter markets, they don't see people as often. They've been quite open and willing to let you drop by and and go over what they're working on. So
it was I was in a similar industry, selling high tech in the telecom industry, and Sprint was a customer, and this was like late 01, somewhere middle late 2001. And I just landed Sprint. And then my company acquired another company. And so we were expanding, and I didn't know the new product line because it was new. And so they teamed me up with a senior guy from the other company, that other division, that knew it very well. And I set 21 appointments in 3 days.
Awesome.
Right. I'm like, I got this guy, and we're still friends to this day. And I knew he was really good and really smart. And I'm like, I'm not going to waste his time. And man, and I can work the phone and I can set appointments. Right. And so it was breakfast, lunch, dinner. It was formal. It was unofficial. Hey, some of the meetings were 15 minutes, but I learned, the being in demand, showing up as a salesperson with an agenda and a tight schedule. Hey, Glenn, thanks for seeing us. We're going across the street to see Joe, in the other division, but we got about 30 minutes. We were seen differently because usually salespeople, I got all day. I brought donuts and let's order some lunch and I'll be here. I'm there like, oh my gosh, get this guy out of my face. Yeah. So now even today, I set tight meetings. People say, do you have a scheduling link? I have a 15-minute meeting. Right. That's my default. Yeah. Do we have a little more time? I'll send them a 25-minute, not 30.
Yeah, right? That's genius. Yeah.
And and I'm like, hey man, I got other stuff to do. I want to answer your questions. I want to see if there's a fit, but it's like, I'm not here to strong arm you, manipulate you, hypnotize you. It's like, let's lay our cards on the table and see how we can work together. Because if that's not your true purpose of meeting, if you just want free advice, like go read my website.
Right. Yeah, exactly. No, it's brilliant. You're right. And you had said something at the beginning about the 21 calls. You had reminded me of something that I had wanted to say earlier, which was one of the other sort of initial things about is the chapter called greed-based learning, right? Which everyone's like, what the hell's greed-based learning? Right? And I'm like, well, there's no better kind. And they're like, what do you mean? Right. And I, and so I always sort of start to explain it by when someone's getting a new car, right? I mean, if you're not a car guy, right, but you're getting a new car, for that moment in time, for those few weeks prior to getting that new car, you become a car guy, right? And all about the specs, about the suspension and the exhaust and the motor and the horsepower and the torque and the size of the tires and the rims and the widths and this and that and every single thing about the car. And takes absolutely no effort to learn it or remember it, right? And because it's somewhat driven by a sense of greed and want, right? And so, we were selling at some points upwards of 70 manufacturers of products, all high-tech products, all with bells and whistles, features and benefits and what have you. And it's like, people would say, how in the world do you learn those products? And I'm like, well, I actually don't. I just wait and I apply greed-based learning. And the moment one of those products becomes, a potential prospect for a potential product comes into focus, then what I do is I look at the data sheet, the website, whatever, and I basically learn and memorize the top 3 or 4 key points to get the discussion going, because I'm not the application engineer. And it takes no effort to remember them because it's a $78,000 instrument and the guy needs 3 of them. And it's quite simple, right? And then, or a guy's coming to town and we might have, maybe not 21 calls, but I might have to take him to, 3 or 4 customers per day for a couple of days, then pass them off to another sales guy. And we're here to sort of, rip the kimono off of a new instrument or whatever. And I get in the car with them at, 7:00 the first day. I don't know anything. Right. And I'm like, all right, what are the top 5 things about this thing? What does everyone care about? What makes this thing special? And we show up at the first customer and I only remember one of them. Right. And I'm like, hey, Jack, want to introduce you, Bob from the factory. This is an amazing new box. We're going to give you a quick overview. One of the things you'll really like is, it's got 20% more memory than anyone else out there, and it's very fast, right? And then he would go across 4 or 5 other points. And then I would remember the second point. And on the second call, I'd introduce him and I'd say, hey, I want to introduce you to the guy from the factory. And I would rhyme off the next 2 points because because I'm learning and I'm adapting. And by the time I got to the end of that first day, I was basically going all through the first 4 or 5 points, and the apps engineer had barely anything to talk about. He was answering questions. And the distinction is not so much it doesn't take rocket science to do it, but when it's effortless to do it when there's money attached to it, right? When it can, but it wasn't so much that, it was that the people that I was competing against internally and externally were not doing that, right? And so he would get in a car, it started back in the 80s when I worked for someone else, and he would get in a car with another salesman the next day. Then he would fly to Ottawa, Montreal, Calgary, Vancouver, wherever. He'd visit with a couple, 3 sales guys. But I was the only one that used GBL on him. And I would, and so when he would debrief with the owner later that week, that Glenn guy in Toronto, don't ever lose him. He's amazing. He's freaking awesome, man. Because of the way I handled it and the way I was able to apply that factor to selling, right? And of course, making sure I filled up his day too, like you said, with those 21 calls, even if they're only 15 minutes long, right? That's super important. Yeah.
And you're right. It's like even now, right? I sell CRMs like Infusionsoft and HubSpot, and I don't have to know every single thing. I need to know what you're concerned about.
Right.
And so if it's a component that I'm not that great at, now I know where to focus. But a lot of times I can really just drill down, like, help me understand, like, why is that important? So when I understand the why, at least 50-50, right? At least half the time somebody says they're interested in a certain thing, but the reason is because they're not using another component properly. Okay. Or they're jerry-rigging something. And so they think they need this other component. Whoa, why are you not doing this? I go, we could do that. It's right. Like, yes. Yeah, exactly. And it's, so by just showing up, it's funny, like show up with something in your mind. Right. And in some ways I don't show up with anything on my mind. Although I guess questions are on my mind. Right. I'm like, I'm not there to do a song and dance. I am not going to prescribe. It's like, tell me where it hurts. How long has it hurt there? Who else besides you cares? On a scale of 1 to 10, how bad does it hurt? How recently did it hurt? If you don't make any changes, what's going to happen, in 3 months from now? Will the pain get worse? So I'm digging in. And as you get little nuggets, you can drop them in but usually, like, I would let the systems engineer do the talking, but I tell them early on, and I learned this from my same buddy that I took up to Kansas, calling on Sprint, but we had a knockoff clause, right? And so that's when, if either of us are going down a rabbit hole or into too much detail, so we'd have to make up a name, right? Like Hilda, Gertrude, whatever, right? So Glenn, we probably should inquire or defer to, or we probably should loop Gertrude in on that before. And so we knew, because a systems engineer, I'm not in sales. Like, the hell you aren't. You're all in sales, right? But they'll talk.
Yeah. People's eyes are rolling up in their head.
Well, they might be rolling up in their heads, or they're with another engineer and they're just going off. And this guy starts to talk about, the heat capacitant, the heat dissipation, it has a high power draw. And I'm like, don't bring that up.
Yeah.
Right. If they ask it, yes, we'll tell them. But I'm not leading with all my negatives, right? Because these systems engineers, they'll do that. Right. So I would coach them on that. But then when I would see the prospect lean in or lean back, and it's like, okay, dude, let's stop for a second.
Yeah.
Why am I getting that feedback from you? What's going on? What are you picking up here? And then make the system engineer shut his pie hole, right? Because
exactly.
Either the customer's ready to buy, or they're like thinking this is not going to work. I'm like, woo, we got to stop and dissect this thing, but then as the system engineer talks, then I get smart, right? Then, so I can learn that agreed-based learning, right? I can learn through osmosis. Yeah. Let him. I'm just taking notes. When is Glenn nodding? Okay, that's a good point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, good point. Those are awesome. Those are really good points. And a few of the other things non-sales related that I, touch on, but is also like how to be a better listener. And I actually give, examples of listening, the difference between active listening and, and just listening to respond, right? Which is what most people do. And and also I talk about learning and practicing empathy and learning the difference between empathy, sympathy, and compassion and what have you. And, I find a lot of people sort of skip over empathy and go to deflection and basically like, how do I sort of acknowledge with a cliche that my mom taught me or whatever I learned somewhere along the way and get rid of this guy that has a problem rather than understanding, what he might be going through, right? Or he or she or what have you. And, and also then, and of course, the third part is learning about gratitude, right? And the chapter is called Gratitude is a Verb. And it's not actually, it's a noun, but I mean, so, and I fought with the editor on that one the idea is that grateful is a feeling that you get, right? And you respect what you're grateful for by showing gratitude. And that's an action, right? That you take. So, you do something kind for someone, like a good example is if you appreciate your mother, she's old, 80 something years old or whatever, you appreciate her and you show your gratitude by visiting her every Sunday, right? That's showing gratitude, right? Not saying, oh, Mom, I'm so grateful for what you did and, on a phone and never visiting her. That's not showing gratitude, right? And and I put all those together in my my package of trying to be a pleasure of doing business with, right? And I also go over some of the salespeople that I hired that I made a mistake where I didn't apply good principles of hiring. Just because you're a good salesman doesn't mean, later when you start your own company and you hire salespeople, you know what you're doing and you can hire the right people. And I made some mistakes. I had to learn some tough lessons. And, so there's some areas where I got a bloody nose and that I go over and, how I clawed my way out of them. And,
Very nice. How have things changed with COVID? Are sales cycles and conversations, are they returning to normal, or are there some big adjustments you've seen?
So our guy, and I mean, each state, province, they're all different, right? Wear a mask, don't wear a mask, whatever. Like Quebec, you're still wearing a mask up until a few days from now. They're going to take it off. But Ontario got rid of masks a few months ago, or some U.S. states got rid of them a long time ago. And, it's so different. It's like a different state, different choice, right? And, so during COVID, so right now I want to say that most of our customers now allow us to go and see them again, but only very, very recently. And so, a few weeks, our guys have been able to visit most of their customers. Prior to that, for a few weeks, they were allowed to visit customers that had a need and were able to get, whatever HR or safety guys to let them in for, fill out a COVID form and come and bring something because they needed to look at it or whatever. And prior to that, though, in Canada, say before January and in 2021, we were basically, it was all done remotely. And I mean, I was not a fan of what happened in our business from March 2020 to January-ish of 2022, in the sense that, our sales guys are 100% of our salespeople are outdoor salespeople. Outdoor meaning they're in their car, they visit customers. They're not making 10 calls a day. They're making like 2 or 3 calls a day. They're spending time with engineers, going over measurement issues and things, and digging in and what have you. And but none of our stuff gets sold on the internet. It doesn't get sold over LinkedIn. It's not that kind of a product. It's a face-to-face thing. And so we had to go to Zoom in March 2020. And so, of course, everyone was like, oh, I got all these Zoom things, a webinar on this and a webinar on that. And I mean, like, Christ, by like summer of 2020, everyone was Zoomed out. And it did not, it did not create a world where we were able to sell over Zoom. Like everything just became stunted. Things were delayed. We saw a lot of instruments and things to higher education, to university labs and undergrad labs, postgrad labs, research labs. And I mean, a lot of stuff just stopped dead in its tracks. And a few post-grad work went on and things like that, but all the undergrad, they all went home. They didn't need it. They didn't need labs. They weren't at school, right? And so, you know, a lot of our guys, half our guys are like, oh, this is the best thing. I'm going to be sitting in my chair and, you know, riding my cockpit, 3 monitors. I need a new laptop, but, you know, got to speed things up and whatever. I need all these. But our business just doesn't work that way. The products we're selling, they just didn't adapt to being sold virtually, right? And I mean, so we do all sorts of, we're very aggressive in our marketing communications and lead generation and things like that. Like we're definitely, pushing the limits on what we can do on terms of advancing our website, our web store, our LinkedIn, all of our social media channels, all of our mailing initiatives that we do, all of our MailChimping and all that stuff, right? We do all that, but it's only so that I can get my salespeople selling to the customers directly. And now we're back to being face-to-face. We thought, and some argued that they might be able to do it remotely and, you know, hey, put an instrument on a bench and show them through cameras and up-down views and whatever. And, you know, once in a blue moon that worked, but not really. And that, you know, that's where I came up with my rule recently of, you know, some people argue with me, but it's called don't confuse marketing with selling. And what I mean by that is that when I'm standing in front of you, you know, in your lobby and you're getting ready to walk me into the lab and sit down and have a discussion, that's selling, right? When I'm face to face with you, everything else is marketing, right? It's lead generation, you know, but our stuff doesn't sell other than, so the salesman's job. So then my challenge is to make sure my salesman isn't glued to his seat doing the marketing department's job. I already have people on the staff to do that. So I don't want to pay 2 people to do the same thing. And they're like, oh, LinkedIn, I'm going to this and that, and whatever. And I'm going to make, you know, I'm like, no, let our marketing people do the lead gen. They'll pass it over to you. And then you can then talk to the customer and what have you. But I don't want you doing, if you want to transition to that job, you go right ahead. But salespeople's job is to be in front of customers. And it's met with some, disapproval by some people. But that's because some products do allow themselves to be sold in a more virtualized way, like software as a service and things like that. You can schedule a lot of things virtually. You can do online demos and you may not need to go to their. But I mean, if you're going to sell them a new ERP system to run everything from accounting to warehousing to sales to, you're going to be visiting that customer. They're not going to buy that off a website, right? And yeah. So that's, I
mean, selling, like I haven't sold physical things, in a long time, but I've sold remotely. I mean, selling software, HubSpot, things like that, consulting. I've 99% of my sales are from home. So I've been fortunate in that regard. But
that's where the argument comes in, where the guys that can do that, our stuff, it has to be viewed. It has to be side by side the competitor. And if we're not standing there along with it, we can ship it in, but we have no idea how it's going to be maneuvered. Maybe they only like the other guy's instrument. You're just sitting there, so the boss is happy that, hey, we looked at the other guy, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the difference for us, is that we are selling hardware, right? And we don't really sell. There's a few software things that go along with our hardware products, but ultimately everything we sell, like we sell base station antennas, right? When you look up at a cell site tower, everything on that tower we sell. And I can tell you that the carriers are definitely going to want to trial that in the field before they buy it and design it into 50,000 base stations, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
So usually the debate comes in when you are selling something like for instance, CRM or something like that.
Yeah, because it's a soft thing, right?
Yeah.
It's and deployed widely, and quite often all the users aren't even in one spot.
Yeah. Exactly.
But I was with a startup from 2004 to 2007, and that's what got me out to California, because I was in Texas covering the West. And it was a new type of computer format. It was still Intel chips. It was all the same guts, right? And and guys would want to demo it. I'm like, why? So what are you hoping to prove? What are you looking for? And then, well, if it could run this software, yes, it can. This and that. And so really the only issues became peripherals, right? Because some things wouldn't work as expected with Bluetooth or USB. So we were doing what they called a try and buy back when I arrived. And I was like, but things would get hung up, right? They had the intention we'd ship this equipment. It would sit in the box and you call them, after 35 days. Oh, I hadn't gotten to it, man.
Yeah.
So I started selling. I said, look, we have a free, I think I'll try and buy. It's free, right? You keep the equipment 30 days. I said, but here's what we ask. We ask that you cover the cost for us to send an engineer out. They fly out, they unbox it, they install it, they push your image on it, they train you on it. And it's not hard. You're going to, you'll pick it up right away, but he just shows all the shortcuts, where the menus are, blah, blah, blah. And so we asked for $1,500 to cover that. And I learned if they couldn't authorize a $1,500 purchase, then they couldn't authorize a $50,000 or $100,000 PO and a major switch, cut over to our form factor. But man, if I got that $1,500 sale, I closed 95% on the bigger package.
Yeah.
So it's like, pick your battles.
Yeah. And our stuff was the same, except that in a lot of cases, that engineer was the salesman, right? Because a lot of it didn't need an FAE or what have you. So we would ship demos, but we would also make sure that one of us went there, set it up, figured out who was going to use it, show them how to push the buttons, and then go back and check on it a week later. Because a lot of times, I need a 2-week trial. And I mean, it would have 2 weeks of dust on it when you got it back. Right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. And, I'd have salesmen saying, we need to buy more of these demos. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. Like, we're not even using the ones we have properly. Right. And, So.
Yep. Amen.
Yeah. I have there's a very small, the smallest chapter in the book, probably called $10 million in Diamonds. And it's a story where, I won't tell the whole story. It takes too long, but essentially, I worked for this jeweler guy who opened his own jewelry store after I'd worked with him at a department store. And years later, 10 years after I got left and went to school, college, got jobs, I went back to Niagara Falls and I saw his store and I dropped in on him and to say hello. And this little Italian guy, and he actually was a polio survivor from the 50s. And so he was in a wheelchair and, a lot of things were very difficult for him, but he was a very good jeweler. And I'd said to him, hey, Romeo, how you doing? He goes, oh, it's amazing. He says, I could be making $10 million in the diamonds, but I am too busy fixing the watches. And I'm like, what? And he's like, sitting in the back fixing watches for $80 a pop or whatever, instead of being out front selling diamonds. And he still hadn't put two and two together that, he should, maybe he should focus on the bigger thing, right? And a lot of times I find our guys, myself included, we get busy doing things that is someone else's job, could be assigned to somebody else, a different department, because it's busy and it's engaging and it feels good, and but it's not gonna make a step function in your sales or in your income or what have you, right? And we do it because it's comfortable, and the other thing is uncomfortable, and requires. So hey, well, I'm busy, like for instance, importing 150 names, into your CRM or whatever, punching them in. No, like make an Excel file, send it to the IT guy, get them to upload them, right? Like take an hour, code the file, put the proper parameters to it, send it over to the import guy, your back end dude, get him to import them and get back on the road selling, right? And oh no, I got to punch them in and massage them, and no, that's not working. Like
no,
right?
I know my he's new into real estate, and he came over this weekend and needed some help with a flyer, right? I'm like, well, just use Canva, right? I'm like, I got an account here, and I can show you a couple things, but it took more than 10 minutes. I was like, okay, stop. So just email this to my assistant Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like she's good at this, right? I
Yeah.
have her for these things because we could have knocked something out in another 10 minutes, but it would have been a half-ass, two dudes
Yeah.
on a free tool kind
Yeah.
of artwork. I sent it to Ashley. A couple hours later, like just these beautiful, the blended, merged,
Exactly. Looking awesome.
imagery and different. She's like
Exactly my
putting
point.
shapes in and shadows. And I'm like, okay, dude, we wouldn't have done that in a week,
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
and so like he's slowly getting it, but he's new, right? So you're
Yeah.
pinching pennies, you're stretching that dollar, and but yeah, you got to figure out like where to spend your money and your time. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
well, this is cool. So we can get your book. It's at your website, right?
Yeah. Yes, sir. GlennPoulos.com.
So I'm linking to that, GLENN, and then it's POULOS.com. Get your book, see what you're up to, and they can come visit you, get some donuts, right?
Yeah,
Maybe watch some hockey.
Yeah, definitely.
And get some sales tips along the way.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Wes.
All right. Well, this has been cool. So Glenn from Ontario, man, thanks for coming on the show. It's been awesome.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
All right, man. Have a great day.
You too. Bye.
Nobody puts baby in a corner. Yeah, baby. On my original notes, as we were going through the interview, I put here, it's like being like a linebacker. We used to say, keep your head on a swivel, right? Always looking left and right, looking for the crossing tight end, looking for a wide receiver coming down on a crack back, looking for, a slot back coming in through the gap and ear holding you, looking for those pulling guards, pulling tackles even. A lot of times back then it was pulling guards. So you're always keeping your head on a swivel. So I like his approach, right? Stand up, don't play on the phone, get your head in the game. Don't be just banging out that last minute email or whatever, and then you're not ready to approach the prospect. And I talk about this in making outbound calls and even receiving a call. A lot of times I get it. You have to take the call, but you don't have to take a long call every time. My son's in real estate, and I've taught this to realtors. Lisa and Yoran Force, they were on the show years ago. They've been my friends since, I don't even know, 2006. They're one of the top brokerage firms in the nation, certainly in California. And I was talking with them about this years ago when I was training for them, that let's say the phone rings. And in real estate, you do have to answer, right? Because people are impatient. But let's say you're in the middle of something, or you don't know enough about these people, right? You're running around ragged. You can answer the phone, greet them, get a little bit of information, and then say, "Hey Joe, hey Mary, thank you for your call. You know what? I'm wrapping up something, right? I'm wrapping up an appraisal. I'm wrapping up an offer. I'm wrapping up some paperwork for one of my clients. Would it be okay if I call you back at this number in 10 minutes?" Okay, you can't go nonstop all the time. You're going to wear yourself out. At a minimum, it gives you a chance to get up, stretch your legs, go to the bathroom, get some water, get some coffee. And in business, you can look these people up. When somebody calls me, I'm like, "What's your name?" "Okay, hey, great. Hey, thanks for reaching out. How can I help?" Boom, boom. Okay, yeah, I think I can help you with that. But look, I'm in the middle of something. I didn't want to miss your call. Would it be okay if I give you a shout back and just give me 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever, right? So in business, I'm looking those people up. So now I'm ready for the call. I can see what's going on. I'm gonna open up 5, 7, 10 tabs. LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, whatever. I'm gonna find any articles, find their website. I'm gonna find Yelp reviews. I'm gonna know a little bit about these people rather than being ambushed. So that's what he's talking about, keeping your head in the game, right? Being ready. Athletes do this. See baseball players with their routines, see pitchers with their routines. The batter in baseball has their routine. Golfers have their routine. Basketball players have their routine with shooting a free throw. How do you clear your mind and get ready to perform your best? So that's what he's talking about. Pay attention. Be ready to engage when the prospect comes out. So how good are you at this? And you know what? If you're just winging it, when I talk about the 7 deadly sins of selling, number 1 is anti-Oakley-itis. It means you're shooting from the hip. You're out there winging it because you don't have a process. You're not in control. 2006, I learned this about myself. I was in B2B sales. I had made at least $100,000 since 1998. In today's dollars, 1998 would be about 155 grand a day. And I was doing that selling mobile homes. I did that for a year and a half. Then I was in B2B sales and high tech. And I had signed up for a course. It was a $600 teleclass back then. We got a PDF and 12 phone calls. And I was growing. It was good stuff. I was hungry. There were no private calls included in this, but I was hungry, and the trainer kind of took me under his wing. I remember specifically, I was sitting outside of my client's office in Torrance, California, and I left early because you never knew what traffic was going to be. I left early, so I got there early, and I had some time, and Steve took my call. And as I sat out front, we went through everything, and I realized I had no process. He was teaching the process. It was starting to sink in, but I didn't know the whole thing from beginning to end. And I hustled, and I was likable, and I was attentive, but I didn't have a process. That's why I was in the class to begin with. But as Steve went through everything, I realized it was a bittersweet moment, because I realized I was going into that meeting without an agenda. I was going into that meeting with the customer, the prospect being in charge. But I knew that would be the last time that ever happened. And it was. So now I have a process. I follow a process. I stay in control. And that's what I teach in the Make Every Sale program. That's what I teach every week in the Sell More of Everything Live. That's where you get to ask questions. I go over additional topics more deeply. So, take me up on these things. They are so affordable, and I guarantee you they're going to help you. If you show up and pay attention and engage and ask questions, you're going to sell more faster at higher margin with less stress. You're going to have a lot more fun. Or you can wing it. Okay? But that's why I had Glenn on, right? He doesn't wing it. 57 steps. 57 things you can do. So if you want to take control, hit me up, right? Go get the course, makeeverysale.com, or join. You'll be glad you did. I'll go sell something.